To our next topic. Why is it that property is important? Well, mother language is important because God created it. Property is important because God says, I move the peoples across the earth. Now think about it. Who was there before the Celta came to Britannia? Remember, Britannia was the original name. The Celts were there only after they drove another people out. Remember the Stonehenge? There was a people there before the Celts. Well, then come the Romans, and then come the Anglo-Saxons. Now the Anglo-Saxons think that they're the super race. Okay, ik is 'n Duits afstammeling. My ma's se mense is McCulloch, so I'm a Scot German. So I'm a little bit anti-Anglo-Saxon. But notice,
you're in the right place.
Yeah. Okay, so the Anglo-Saxons, hulle taal is presies dieselfde afstam, presies. It comes from the same root as Afrikaans. If you think about it, arm and elleboog and all this. But they got mixed up with a bunch of Latin guys. And they think now that that's the super race. Well, if you look at it, and I can show this by their own research, the humanists' own research. There's two books I would recommend. The Anglo-American Establishment by Quigley, and then he has another book, a thick book called Tragedy and Hope, which gives the vision for developing of a world order, starting with Smuts and Rhodes. They were in on it from the very beginning. Remember, Smuts was the one who brought the League of Nations and then was one of the founders of the United Nations. And they wanted to remove all property rights. So the goal of Smuts is holisma. Now, Professor Hachia Stuker has written a whole article on that. And you can get in his CD with all of his collected works where he critiqued Smuts' book, Holism and Evolution. Basically what Smuts says is that our goal of evolution is to become greater and greater and greater unity. So therefore, get rid of as many borders and as many languages as possible. Now, of course, when you say you got to get rid of languages, you have to have a language. So what language is it that everyone says they must have? Engels. That's why they're pushing English. That was the goal all along. Remember, before the Afrikaner Nationale Partij met alles say fota, hulle het dit verstaan. That the goal was to the whole of South Africa to ver-Engels. So the purpose of property then is we need to understand. Now, where does property come from? Property comes from the Trinity. Okay, now why? You say, well, what? Okay, let's look at this. Within God, there's threeness and oneness. Okay, now let me ask you something. What is better, diversiteit of eenheid? Hoeveel sê diversiteit is beter as eenheid? Okay, hoeveel sê eenheid is beter as diversiteit? Okay, hoeveel weet nie? Okay, what is interesting is, if I would have asked this question 30 years ago, the Afrikaners said, eendracht mag. Unity is better than diversity. So now the Afrikaner is beginning a groot paradigma-verschuiving towards the idea that diversity is good, and that is good. But within God, He's both unity and diversity. Now, how does that apply to property? So let's look at this. There's true unity and real diversity. Both are good. Both are equal within God. You can't say one is better than the other. They're both good. And so God has no bias towards unity or diversity. He just says both are good. So He creates a world in which there's a diversity of languages and diversity of lande, waarin elke taal gepraat wordt. But He wants the unity of people serving the one true God. That's His goal, to fill the earth with His glory. But He doesn't deny the diversity of property. and not just individual property, but also a volkseigendom. Is it wrong to make a border and defend your border? A lot of people say yes. Say yes, it's wrong. No borders, no nations, no deportations. No, wait a minute. That guy probably has a house with a lock on it. He believes in borders. Obama, who wants to have no borders, builds a big wall around his house in Washington, D.C. with electric lines around it. He believes in borders. So everybody believes in borders. It's just whose borders. Can a people protect their borders? That's the whole issue in America now. Can we build a border wall? Can Afrikaner develop borders which they can defend? I think so. So, remember, the Trinity has uniqueness. The Father is not the Son is not the Spirit, but it also has community. And the Trinity is very jealous of His uniqueness as a community of three in one. And He's a Yaluar Sachot. And He doesn't want there to be any rival to His three in oneness. So there's both unity and diversity within God, collective property and individual property. Okay, so His triune nature and character has both common or privat, and common, which is gemene, and personal, which is privat, eigendom. So He's now His wise creation design. He's designed the universe to reflect how He is. He does not want a one-world, homogeneous, one-language mess of a world. That's why He created the Tower of Babel. He said, if the world is unified, they will become so evil that I'll have to destroy them again. So I will divide them so that if one people is evil, I'll destroy that one, but I won't have to destroy the neighbor. And that's a very important principle, as we see. So it's creation designed to keep the earth decentralized. He doesn't want a gecentraliseerde eenheidsstaat in anywheres. In fact, there was a German scholar that was here recently. Did you guys, was it here at AfriForum? Yeah, Afrisaka. But he showed that the Germans probably were a lot better when they had many different little mini German states than it is with this centralized state that they've got now. Kind of interesting. So He always then governs the world through His law, through His design, and through His covenants. Well, we don't have time to get into all of the theology of it, but we'll talk about it like this. A family. Why is it that the Afrikaner, apart from the liberal Inge Kerk and the andere kerken, say that it's one man and one woman? Why is it that it's like that in the Bible? Where is that based on? Die Scheppungsontwerp, the creation design, and out of that creation design comes the vet, or the order. One man, one woman. So it's a very important thing. Now, why is it that we have 6 days of work, 1 day set aside for rest to refresh us? Creation, design. Why did God put peoples in the earth, give them their own language? Creation, design. So everything either comes out of God's wise design, or it comes out of His wise character. He's three in one. We can trace every ethical principle back to those things. So the next thing is, He rules the earth through His covenants. And His covenants very clearly says that man is not king. God is king. He's the one who designs the principles. And so we have to find how to govern and how to live life through this is a summary of the biblical principles. So and he deals through covenants. Now let's see what a covenant is. First of all, the covenant says there's one creator, there's one king over the whole earth. And He just says, all land is mine. And land is not permanently given to a people. Remember, there were some people there before the Celts came, and then comes the Romans, then comes the Anglo-Saxons, then comes the Vikings, and now comes the Muslims. Each time they push the other people back or change the culture. God sends peoples over the earth in His sovereignty. The whole earth belongs to the Lord. So we can't say, dit is ons land en ons zal dit niet toegee. No, maybe God will push a people out. But why does He push a people out? That's the next question. So, when He gives dominion over a land, He doesn't give sovereignty over the land. Okay, now what is the difference? Sovereignty is royal authority to make laws, to judge the laws, and to, king, judge, law. To make, to judge, and to execute the laws. He says, I am the God, the King, who make the laws, who judge the laws, and who put the laws into practice. And that's Isaiah chapter 33, verse 21 and 22. It's very clear. So He doesn't give man sovereignty. He gives him only service ability. We are servants of God. And that means that we need to follow His instructions, His creation design, and to be like Him, be holy as He is. That's why we don't lie. Well, because God doesn't lie. That's why we're faithful to our wife and our husband. Because God is faithful to His bride, Israel, now the Algemene Kerk. So God is sovereign, not us. So we see God is sovereign. That's the first principle of covenant. God's sovereign. So He gives the land with stipulations. What must we do to stay in the land? Well, there are 5 elements of every covenant. First, there's a king. He's sovereign. Second, we're not kings. We're dienstknechten. We're servants. We're administrators. So a school, the school hoof, he must listen to the board of the school. He doesn't make his own laws. He has to listen to the board of the school. The board of the school is like the king. He's the administrator. God's the administrator, the lawmaker. We have to administer what He says. And if we don't, God says, I'll push you out. In any land, it's like that. Now, He always gives norms, laws, boundaries. God has a boundary between us and the other people. He has a boundary between a wife and a husband. He's got a boundary between wife, a husband, and the children. There's boundaries. God creates boundaries. Peace comes through the enforcement of God-created boundaries. And if you take away boundaries, it causes war. But that's exactly the opposite of what Smuts taught. Smuts taught that take away boundaries and you'll have peace. It always creates war if you take away boundaries. If you take away the boundary around your house, what's going to happen? They're going to break in and they're going to steal everything you have. That doesn't create peace, that creates war. Then everybody has an oath of loyalty. God says a people must make an oath of loyalty. And the Afrikaner was one of the closest there was to a covenantal type people like Israel. America was semi. But when you say we want to serve the Lord and you put in the Constitution, we're going to be served the Drie-enige God. God says, okay, if you want to serve me, then, you make this oath to serve me, then follow my instructions. If you love me, you will what? Keep my commandments. And then the other thing of covenant, He gives us boundaries, He gives us land, but we have to pass those biblical principles on to our children. So you notice how property and moedertaalonderwijs gaan hand in hand. So it's very important to see that. Okay, so all peoples must learn from what the Scripture says, and that's what Deuteronomy 4:6-9 says. He says, don't think I've given you this law for yourself, O Israel. This law will be show all the other nations what it means to be wise and what it means to be just. So we can see mother tongue language and property rights flow out of the character of God, flows out of His creation design, and it flows out of His covenant. Okay, so is that the next one? Well, the basic principle. So let's just look at it. Why can we use the Old Testament? Well, the Old Testament is created by God out of His character. But it's in a cultural context of Israel. We have to take the principle out of Israel's context, put it over into our context. And there's a whole way to do that. But we need to say, we've got to use the Old Testament. That's what the old Buracha did. They saw themselves, okay, they got it mixed up a little bit, but we can always revise, and we can grow, and we can learn. That's what they didn't do with Ras Volkanasi. They should have revised it instead of throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we've got to see that God gave us the Ten Commandments as a law for every people. Now, what does the Ten Commandments show us? Well, first of all, that God is holy, just, and faithful. That's the source. His wisdom shows us the creation design. Then He gives us two summary commands. Love God, love your neighbor. One of the big problems that I found in doing my theology of ethnicity is the Afrikaner threw out the Fremdelingwette in the Old Testament. And it says, you shall love the stranger and have the same law that you have for yourselves for him. If he's in your land, you must enforce the same thing. So if he comes in, he can't then worship Afgoede. He can't worship the ancestors. He's going to, and he can't visit the Sangoma, these things. You can't allow that to happen. You have one standard. It was God's law which was the grensbeheer, to begin. And the Afrikaners didn't do that. They say, well, they can be married to 5 wives. They can worship the Sangoma and all that kind of stuff. And we're not going to let them become part of us. And we denied the stranger laws. That's love God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's what it means to love your neighbor. Then, how do you know how to love God? Well, the first 4 commandments. Don't have any idols. When you make an oath, do it in the name of the Lord and keep it. And then honor the rest day. What was the other? Oh yeah, and the 2 commands for the worship God alone. How do you love your neighbor? 6 commandments. Don't lie, don't commit adultery, etc., etc. Don't murder. That's how God gives us those in His covenant. Every people must do that. And if you're going to have a Christian land, everybody in the land needs to be taught and that to be enforced. See, that was one thing that happened. There was other things that was weak, but now, what are the 5 pillars of a Christianizing culture? Well, there's right to liberty. Now, there's 2 commandments that guarantee liberty. Does anybody know which 2 commandments of the 10 guarantee liberty? Ek is die Here jou se God, what? That freed us from the land of Egypt and gave us liberty under me. Trust me now. Don't have any other gods, because there's no other God that will give liberty. The second one is life. 2, protect life. 6. The commandment, do not murder. Now, in the Bible, it very clearly says, if you murder a baby in the womb, it's murder. And you can see that in the book of Exodus. And he also says, if you want to refresh your life, have 1 day of rest. 2, family. There's 2 that protects family. Ja. Je mag niet echtbreek nie. Okay, there's impartial justice. There's 2 that protect impartial justice. I'll give you the hint. When you, pardon? False getuienis, because that guarantees justice in a court. And when you lift your hand up and make an oath, I will tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I don't know if it's in South African courts, but in English common law courts, everybody says that. so you put your hand in the Bible, I promise to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Those two protect impartial justice. That's called due process of law. Then we have private property, the fifth. Notice, God will protect private property if a people will protect the first four. If the people reject the first four, God won't protect their property. Now that's found in the U.S. Bill of Rights as well. It's a right before God, but it's also a responsibility. If somebody breaks into your house, okay, so your neighbor, somebody's breaking into his house. The first thing you don't do in South Africa is call the police. What do? You help your neighbor. It's the buurtwag. So you take care of your neighbor and you want him to take care of your property. You have a responsibility, but you also have a right. No one to steal your property. So this is a covenantal right, and before God it's inalienable. Only men can break it. And you can break the command and God can take away the right to liberty. If you break it, you'll have to go to sit in the tronk, and yes, a esclava. So God alone can remove it. He alone can alienate property. If you steal something, however, you lose your right to your property. So if you steal something, then you have to pay it back, plus in the biblical principle, you have to pay back 100% more than you paid back. And you don't give it to the state. Who do you give it to in the biblical principle?
The person who stole it.
Exactly. But see, now, the magistrate only administers God's law. He's not there to make his own laws. But the ANC and American government says, we make our own laws, and you have to do what we say. No. If they don't, if they say, we take away your plus, and you are innocent of any crime, that's theft. The state can steal just as long as anybody else. Now, should the Afreforum and the Dopperkerk, I don't think the Ingi Kerk would do it, stand up and say, this is exactly what Jezebel and Achab gedaan to Naboth. Remember this story? He wanted Naboth's vineyard. And he comes back and he pouts. And Jezebel, the idol worshipping lady, says, well, don't worry about it. You're the king. You can do what you want to do. I'll make sure. So she makes sure that he gets that property. And the prophet came to him and said, you've stolen that man's property and you've killed him. When David broke the law, the commandment of Echbriach in Moord, what did God send? A prophet to stand up and say, that was wrong, that was sin. That's part of what the church's responsibility, to speak the truth of God to power. And that's found also, these principles are found in the Declaration of Independence in America. So let's go on now. You can see, it's built upon knowing the true God, the triune God, the drie-eenigheid. We're to love God and love man. What happens if you take away God from that temple of Afrikaner civilization? It all falls apart. First, the foundation stones break. Then each one of the pillars, right to liberty, life, justice, family, and property. Each pillar breaks, and as soon as it's completely ready to collapse, the whole thing collapses. And America is about ready to collapse. Dalk ook die Afrikaner. Ons moet terugkeer